Hi there, my friends. Happy Saturday. I am here to share with you a new deck. This is the Melanated Classic deck, inspired by the Rider-Waite-Smith, and I've got it here among the collection of Rider-Waite-Smith decks I've used most among the years. I'm not going to do a comparison. I just wanted to sort of add it. I just wanted it to be part of the family. So here's the Carol Herzer deck, which I am a fan of, and this was my first deck, which is the original Rider-Waite Tarot pack. And the one that I probably have used the most over the years is the Universal Weight, which this is this is a deck that I trimmed. This was the first deck I ever trimmed. But I thought it would be nice to have it in the family because I think this is a deck that deserves attention, and I think it's a deck that's been a long time in the making, and I'm happy to share with you. So this is, again, the Melanated Classic Tarot, inspired by Rider-Waite-Smith, by Julia Goolsbee and Ubria Chanshaw. And this is an independently published deck. It arrived while I was traveling this week, so I couldn't sort of jump into it. I have gone through the deck, I've used it a little bit, and so this isn't a first impressions. This is actually a deck that I've had some time with. I will say that I've been following this for a while and excited. I feel like this was a deck that was a long time in the making. So the Melanated Classic Tarot, inspired by the Rider-Waite-Smith, is a recasting of the Rider-Waite-Smith with melanated folks, with people of color. And I think that I think it's going to open a lot of doors for folks who have not been pulled into the Rider-Waite-Smith because of its whiteness and its Christianity also, although I think most of the imagery from the Rider-Waite-Smith is here. And I think that the other real success of it is it's not just a recoloring of the Rider-Waite-Smith. The attention that you'll see to the detail, the attention to the faces, and the bodies are, this isn't just like taking this deck and recoloring it, which is interesting because there's a great story in the Guidebook about that and how that inspired this deck. But this is something more than that. So, independently published. I will put both the artist's website and the link where you can get this and the author's website in the link below. Also their Instagram pages, if I remember to get that specific. So independently published, available now, and so here's the deck. So it comes in a tuck box. Now I will say the box is a little larger than the deck and the Guidebook, which meant that when it showed up in the postal envelope, the box was a little crushed. I have a few quibbles about the deck. They're really more about production than the deck itself, and that's just an inevitable thing that happens with indie decks, right? I think a lot of us as readers who have not had the experience of publishing a deck don't really know how expensive and difficult it is to get everything just right. So just to get the quibbles out of the way, the box, it's not the sturdiest box, and it probably will not live in this box, although it's nice and glossy. Like, the production of it in that way is great, but because it's crushed, like, the bottom flap won't stay closed. Cardstock is super thin, which I don't mind because it shuffles incredibly well. I'm just worried that because I'm fairly rough with my decks, I might damage it. And then the sharpness on a few of the images is a little muddy, but those are my only quibbles, so just to get those out of the way. Everything else I think is really successful, particularly, by the way, let's put that over here, this. All right, so I'll come to the deck in just a moment, and I'll do a walkthrough of it so you can see the whole thing. This little guidebook is brilliant, okay? I frequently do not read guidebooks, particularly if they're pamphletty, but I just wanted to see what the author was going to say about the experience of creating this deck, and immediately got sucked in. Like, this is a writer I cannot wait to see more from. I love the style of this guidebook. If you know my book, or if you know my channel at all, you know that I tend to have a very laid-back conversational style in my writing. If you read Tarot on Earth, you know that I can be a little, winky and fun. I try to let my personality come through in the writing I do. That is so much the case with this book, and I just found it so refreshing and delicious to spend time with. I really want to read more by Ubria. I adored this guidebook, and I've been reading a lot of tarot books over the last 18 years. I've never come across anyone who has talked about the minor arcana in the way that they do in this book. I think that this is such a success. If you get this deck, do not skip this experience. And if you were on the fence about this deck, because you're like, do I need another Rider-Waite-Smith deck? This is one very good reason to add this to your collection, and to have a deck that is representational of more than just white Europeans. So I want to read for you a little bit of the introduction from the guidebook, and just give you a sense of the authorial intent, so to speak. And I love. Am I going to read all of it? I don't know. I'm gonna see where this goes. So let me just. This is from Ubria Crenshaw, who's the author of the guidebook. Welcome to your Melanated Classic Tarot deck. This deck was inspired by the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot deck, originally published in 1910. So we get a little bit of history there. Although the Rider-Waite-Smith deck features universal archetypes meant to spark the intuition of every man and woman in the human race, and despite the fact that Coleman Smith was a biracial woman of color who spent her early life living in Jamaica, she was nonetheless paid to draw scenes depicting whites exclusively. We get a little bit of the author's origin story, but what I think is key here is her experience, which I think is the experience of a lot of folks who are queer people or people of color, or who are not traditionally physically abled, in coming to the tarot. So this is one reason why I think this deck is so important. I only started reading tarot cards about 18 months ago in 2017, which, for like, what the fuck, because this book is so brilliant. Like, clearly this is a person who was meant to be doing this. So amazing. I began the Rider-Waite-Smith deck let me try that again. I began with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck because it's the most straightforward teaching tool for a beginner. However, the non-melanated images were off-putting because so much of tarot reading, here it is about the ability to interpret and discern situations, because it causes unnecessary strain and psychic interference when none of the cards look like you or any of the people you're asking about. And I think that that is why on this channel, when I talk about representation, when I talk about diversity, when I talk about what Shonda Rhimes calls normalization, it's that. It's like, yes, all of these decks are great, but if you're missing from them, you still feel at a distance from it, you know? And I am lucky because, you know, as a white person, all the decks reflect me in that way. As a queer person, I can frequently look beyond that, the absence of queer people in the book, in the decks, but you still feel it. And so imagine if you're constantly reading, or if all the options are just people who don't look like your world and look like your experience. So I think that that's so important. This is a story. I'm going to share it because I mentioned it. I don't want to sort of steal all the artist thunder, but she writes, when I was a little girl, my grandmother gave me a birthday card every year. I don't remember seeing melanated greeting cards until the 90s. My grandma would just buy the cards with the little white girls and use a brown crayon to color their faces and hands. She wanted me to see myself represented in the world, even if she had to put me there herself. My grandmother had been my ancestor 18 years when I purchased my first deck, but when I began to study those Rider-Waite-Smith cards, her spirit rose up and insisted somebody color those babies brown. If brown people are using divination tools to divine brown lives, then divination tools need to be brown too. We are done playing with white Jesus, which I love the way she writes so much. Then she talks about the artist, the amazing artist who drew all 78 of these melanated cards is named Julia Goolsby here. And again, someone you should follow on Instagram. She talks about the connection between the Julias in her lives. And then she writes, as new generations of colorful folks turn towards tarot cards for guidance, spirituality, and entrepreneurship, it is imperative we use tools that reflect and replenish our self-esteem, power, and potential. The Melanated Classic is for everyone, but it's finally about us. You dig? Enjoy. And I just love, like, this is so, you can just hear her voice. I was actually really moved by the story, and just, I just love the freshness of her voice. So, and I'm going to talk about this little book again when we get to the minors, because again, brilliant, brilliant stuff. So, but let's look at the cards, and I'm going to zoom on in. Coloring wise, as I said, this is not a redrawing of the, it's not a recoloring of the Rider-Waite-Smith, it's a redrawing of it. I would say palette-wise, of the cards, it's probably most reminiscent of the, I'm going to just a touch so I don't lose the edges, of the Radiant, the Radiant Rider-Waite-Smith, which I don't have, but there's a richness to it that you can see is obviously very different from the really muted traditional original Rider-Waite-Smith images. There are only some small adjustments in terms of the settings of the cards, which you'll see. So this will go relatively quickly because I think most people know these images, but I want to give you a sense of the richness and beauty of the deck. All right, so I'm just going to flip through and chat and give you a sense of it. Oh, the backs. I really like this back. I love simple backs for cards. But there's a richness of color, which I really think pops. And the card size is relatively large because unlike the originals, you don't have a title bar at the bottom. The name of the card is just superimposed on the image. So here's the Magician, the High Priestess. So it's very Rider-Waite-Smith in almost every way, and there are a few details that have been adjusted, which I think are really surprising and really great. Here's the Empress, the Emperor. Now in the guidebook, Ubria talks about the majors in terms of astrology, which has for a lot of my career not really sparked anything, but she's very, very creative with the minors, and so the reason why I bring it up now is because it's going to become important later. So let's just look at the Empress, for example, and just let me read, because the Empress has always been one of my favorite cards. So let me just give you a sense of her style in the guidebook. The Empress card represents the planet Venus. Venus influences femininity, receptivity, fertility, love, and abundance. She is creative in all aspects of life. She births babies and business plans from the same metaphysical womb. Since she literally creates reality, she also keeps it real as fields of wheat and grain to feed you. Ask her anything and she'll tell you. Her most valuable lesson is the paradox of knowing your limits amidst infinite possibilities. Everything in moderation, okay? And I mean that everything in moderation, okay? That's her. That's the author, which I love. So here we go. So I don't know if you can, no, this isn't one of them. So why it's important that this isn't just a redrawing, I'm sorry, I keep saying that, a recoloring of the Waite-Smith, is because the faces are appropriate. You know what I mean? It's not just a recoloring of like white European faces. These faces they feel authentic. I love the coloring of this Hermit card. Like those dark blues, just gagged. I love it. So it's not artistically much different. The style of the artist's drawings is similar in tone and stroke to Pamela Coleman Smith's, and I think there was an intent to stay true to those images because, as Ubria points out in the book, you know, they're familiar and they're accessible in terms of a teaching tool. So the goal, I don't think, was to sort of overcomplicate, but to allow for representation. In fact, on the box and the guidebook, it says representation matters, especially with the archetypes of magic and power. So you can see that it's not just taking a coloring book. It's redrawn and made appropriate for this theme. I mean, there are some small changes here and there. Like, for example, instead of the traditional Christian imagery, there's the Pan-African flag. And there are little details like that, which I think is really effective all the way through. And there's just life to the cards, which is so important. So now we get into the suit of wands, and let me let me talk about one of the primary reasons, aside from the author's style of the book, that I like, is the way she engages the construction of the meanings of the minors, which I should have asked if she created this or what, but I've never, in all the reading I've ever done, seen anything like this. So here's what she says to introduce the minor arcana. To grasp the story presented in the minor arcana, we're going to go in numerical order instead of elemental order. This means instead of discussing all the wands, then the cups, then the swords, and the pentacles, we're going to talk about the two of wands, then the two of cups, then the two of swords, then the two of pentacles, then the threes, etc. So, and she encourages you to take the deck out and get them out by suit. But here's what's brilliant, and here's what I hadn't ever really seen discussed in this way before. So she's using the elemental associations of the minors and the majors to come up with the narrative of the card, and I think this is brilliant. All right, so the two of wands is Mars and Aries. So the Tower card is Mars. So what she suggests is we take out the cards from the deck. I may zoom out to do this. So we have the Tower and Mars and Aries. Emperor is the air, is Aries is the Emperor. Oops. Okay. So she says, pick up the Tower card and put it on top of the Emperor's head. I'm going to have to zoom out a bit. All right. So pick up the Tower card, put it on top of the Emperor's head. This is the energy of the Two of Wands. Now put the Two of Wands next to those two cards. All right. So we follow our instructions here. So, the Tower is falling on the Emperor's head. Perhaps he is angry with the Empress. Perhaps he built a relationship on a false foundation, one that was based on his desires only. And what is he thinking? You see the crown flying from the Tower? Does he want to be Emperor or no? But what makes an emperor, his kingdom or his empress? If we look at the actual Two of Wands, we see a man looking off into the sea. He has two wands, spirits, one he eagerly reaches for, and the other stabilized and clasped to the foundation. He has the world in his hand. If he already has a stable wand and the world, what is he reaching for? Maybe he figures he can trade the world right quick and get another wand. Oh, okay. I guess he figures he doesn't have to hold on to the stable wand because it ain't going nowhere. So what does he do? He offers the world to his new wand, the unstable one ready to fall. Brilliant, right? Come on. I've never heard anyone write about the minors this way. And as someone who is only just sort of beginning the astrology exploration, I think this is genius. So let's look at one more. Let's look at the Three of Wands in this way. Let me put these aside. So the Three of Wands is Empress, is Venus in Cancer. So that's Empress in the Chariot. All right, so pick up the Empress and put it on top of the Chariot. So it goes like this, and then the Three of Wands goes next to it. Can you see that? Yes, we can. The energy, this is the energy of the Two of Cups. The Empress, unsure what's going on with the Emperor, jumps in the Chariot, her feelings, and pushes her emotions for him faster, harder. Has something changed? How does he feel? Is he okay? The Empress wears a blue tunic over a white dress. The blue represents how she thinks she feels, love, and the white underneath represents the fact that she doesn't really know. Yet she's forcing her cup on him because she senses he's holding back. See how his foot hesitates? He's taking her cup, but not giving his own. Does the Empress notice, or does she believe she has enough love for both of them? Oh, I'm sorry, that's the Two of Cups. Let's not be a dummy and let's look at the Two of Cups. I forgot. See, she told us that we were not going in suit order, and I did not listen. There we go. So she's taking the energy of the two cards, the astrological combination of the minors and the image of Pamela Coleman Smith's originals to create a narrative that makes sense within the context of the, and this is the first time, honestly, really the first time that astrological associations for the minors have remotely had any consonant currency with me. I think this is so brilliant. I really do. And just, oh my god. And so it's not just about this deck, you know what I mean? This little time. I think if you're a beginning reader and you read this guidebook, you will have an exceptionally strong foundation for reading cards. Now, it's not the way that I've learned them, but who cares? Like, oh, like this is so valuable, I think, and I think that's brilliant. Especially if this deck is going to welcome in a whole community of people who have felt put off by the whiteness of the cards for a long time, then great. Like, what a great way to start, by having a brilliant guidebook. And again, I really hope that there's a full-length book coming from Obria, because I just adore this little white book. This little, well, I shouldn't call it a little white book, huh? That's totally inappropriate for this deck. All right. Well, so that's that. Let's go and just sort of go back through, looking at our flip through here. Let me go back and put the 2 of Cups back where the order goes. And if I were smart when I reordered the deck, I would have put it in suit order. I'm sorry, in number order. So there's the 2 and the 3, which we've seen. Here's the 4. The 5. It's in the minors where some of the images are a little muddy, although from this distance, oh, I should zoom back in. From this distance, that's harder to see. And I mean, it's not, you know, it's not the end of the world. It's, I don't like decks to be too perfect, and certainly Pamela Coleman Smith's art is not perfect. So, it's just, it was enough that I could see it when I did my original flip through. Here's the Page of Wands. Yeah, I was just going to repeat myself. I mean, it's in the faces of these cards. Like, there's one of the things you can argue in Pamela Coleman Smith's, in the lithograph. I don't know, you know, we have no real idea how clear or not Pamela Coleman Smith's original drawings were, at least from what I can tell. You are constantly sort of looking at faces that are sort of just blank and vague and muddy, you know what I mean? But there's specificity on these faces. You know, there's humanity there, which I don't even think I realized was missing. That's not the right way to say it. I really do love Pamela Coleman Smith's art. I get a lot of shit because I'm mean to that deck. It's not the deck, it's Waite's system. The Golden Dawn, really. But, you know, you don't notice, or I haven't, that the faces are so blank until you start to see specificity in the cards, and I think that's a success here. So here's the King of Wands, and then we get into the Suit of Cups. And the stories, the scenes are all there. Nothing has really changed in that regard. Sorry, I just wanted to see that one a little closer. But there are subtle details which I think are really great. So that's the 10. So we get into the court. Here's the page, the knight, the queen, the king. I love the colors. One of the things that's put me off about a lot of editions of even the Universal Weight is the sort of like muted. I like rich colors, and so the coloration of the scenes in this deck is captivating, I think, which is really nice. Here's another change. This is just a small thing, but the face in the Three of Swords is really surprising and disarming. And yeah, you know, sometimes I don't have words for things. The King of Swords eyes from here just caught me. It was like, it's like he's just looking right out of the card in this incredible way. So here's Pentacles. The Nine of Pentacles has always been one of my favorite cards in the Waite-Smith, and I feel like this is kind of what it was always meant to be. Whoops. There we go. Page. The Court of Pentacles has also always been my favorite in the Rider-Waite-Smith. And there's the Queen. And there's the King. So let me tell you this, even though I was sort of, I did mention the muddiness of a couple, and muddy it's just slightly less sharp in some of the minors. I could not tell which ones from here. So that's a good thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and shuffle and just give you that sense. It shuffles great because the cardstock is really thin. You know, it's thin enough that I can sort of, you know, my hands aren't super big, so it's not easy to do that, but it does sort of bend in my hands that way, like really easily. That's great from a shuffling standpoint because I love to riffle shuffle, and it riffle shuffles really nicely. I do tend to be rough with my decks, so I'm a little nervous about damaging it, but you know, it's like in the day-to-day use of things, I really like a good shuffling deck more than anything else. I'm trying to compare the cardstock to something. There's another deck that I've used recently that was like this. It might be the Next World, the new edition of the Next World. Was that the deck? Yeah, that one had, I think, similarly thin cardstock, but again, shuffles really great. All right, so I'll do a little layout. Because I just watched Benabelle's new video on Sightseeing the Tarot, I'm going to use the spread she used from Eden Gray. Which is not easy because of the tripod here in the way, but so we cut right to left with our left hand, and then we gather them up. And we do that again. Really, this would be the coronet and the reader. And then I think it gets flipped over. I'm doing this from memory, so ignore me. It's so hard to do things with a tripod in your face. All right, so you take the top card of the pile and you move it down. And then you take the bottom card of the pile and you use that. So we'll move these out of the way. Can you see? Yep. All right. And so then you read past, future, and present, if I'm not mistaken. So the middle is the present, this is the future, and this is the past. The order of that might be slightly different, but that's how I remembered it. Look how great it looks in a spread. And actually, the way Benabelle laid this out, I think she did it in a line, but it was, I kept reading the first card as the top card, so I did it this way just to remember which was the bottom card. But so you would read the past as this is the Wheel of Fortune in the Tower, like holy shit, that's some past. You know, it's just a cycle of devastations, a cycle of frustrations, a cycle of failing. In the present, with the Ace of Wands and the Page of Cups, there's a little bit of a breakthrough and a little bit of like learned emotional lessons from those cycles, and in the future some real rest and joy coming your way. So that's just super fast and and easy. It's funny, after a few years of reading only with pip cards and really focusing on the math of the reading, coming back, and I've been working with a lot of scenic decks again. Coming back and having a narrative story with the images is like, oh wow, that was easy. Not that you know, it's such a funny thing to like have that again. Anyway, so this is the Melanated Classic Tarot by Julia Goolsby and Ubria Tronshaw. The deck is great. Cardstock's a little thin, box is a little wonky, but don't let any of that stop you. The deck itself is beautiful. The faces on the cards are so alive and emotionally resonant, which I think is really an improvement on many Rider-Waite-Smith inspired decks that are out there. And this little guidebook is so packed with information and brilliance that, you know, even if you're like, I don't have room for another deck, you do have room for this one because you want this guidebook. So bravo to these creators. Love this a lot. Happy to encourage you to, or to enable you to add this to your collection. I'm going to get questions from people who are going to ask me, you know, is it appropriate for a white reader to work with a deck that's all people of color? And you know, I don't know the answers to everything, but what I do know is that people of color have been forced to work with decks full of white people for hundreds of years if they're interested in studying this. So what a wonderful thing to have an invitation to expand our perceptions. That's my answer to that at the moment. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I am so in love with this experience. Really, really just gagged by this book. I think it's great. If you watch this, please write a full-length book on anything, and I will read it and share it with people. Have a great weekend. Be safe.